The 50 most famous artworks by Rafael Sanzio. Number 50. Virgin of the Curtain, 1514. In the context of the 16th century, when Renaissance painting was reaching its peak in Italy, Rafael Sanzio was consolidating his position as one of the most influential artists of his time. Madonna of the Curtain is a work that synthesizes his mastery of color, composition, and the representation of divine motherhood. In this painting, the Virgin Mary appears with the child Jesus in a warm and harmonious setting, where a curtain, from which the work takes its name, is subtly drawn to reveal the scene. The presence of Saint Sixtus and Saint Barbara adds an element of intercession and devotion, enriching the religious symbolism. From a technical point of view, Raphael achieves an enveloping atmosphere through the use of light and depth, integrating the human figure with a carefully constructed architectural space. The softness of the faces and the naturalness of the character's posture are unmistakable characteristics of his style, influenced by symmetry and classical balance. The unfolding curtain not only serves as a scenographic device, but also creates a sense of theatricality, as if a sacred mystery were being revealed to the viewer. This technique of framing the scene with architectural elements is found in several of his works, consolidating his mastery of composition. Within Raphael's career, this painting is located in his most mature phase, when he was working on the decoration of the Vatican rooms and was in full collaboration with his workshop. The refinement in the execution, the serenity of the expressions, and the majesty of the composition make it one of his most successful representations of the Virgin. In the history of art, it has been admired for its ability to combine the divine with the human, establishing a model that would influence generations of later artists. The subtlety of the details and the precision with which Raphael manages to transmit maternal sweetness have made this work an unavoidable reference within Renaissance art. Number 49. The expulsion of Heliodorus from the temple, 1512. In the vibrant context of the 16th century, when Italian Renaissance art was at its peak, Rafael Sanzio was commissioned to decorate the Vatican rooms, a project that would mark a milestone in his career. The expulsion of Heliodorus from the temple is one of the most dynamic and narrative pieces of this cycle, standing out for its masterful handling of movement and light. The scene depicts the divine punishment of Heliodorus, who attempted to steal the treasures of the Temple of Jerusalem and was stopped by a heavenly apparition. This dramatic composition combines the earthly with the supernatural, illustrating divine intervention in a stunning way. From a technical point of view, Raphael displays unrivaled mastery in the organization of space and the distribution of figures. In the foreground, Heliodorus is struck down by a spectral horseman, accompanied by angels who reinforce the feeling of divine justice. The composition is balanced by the presence of static figures, such as Pope Julius II, who observes the scene with serenity, contrasting with the chaos unleashed at the other end. The richness of the details, the folds in the clothing, and the dramatic use of chiaroscuro reinforce the depth and realism of the painting. The architectural perspective gives a sense of grandeur and monumentality that enhances the importance of the event narrated. Within Raphael's body of work, this painting stands out for its emotional charge and its ability to tell a story with extraordinary visual power. His focus on body language and the use of light as a narrative element influenced generations of later artists, including the Baroque, who adopted his sense of drama and theatricality. The way in which he manages to convey divine power through movement and lighting makes this work one of the most striking of his legacy. The interplay between the heavenly and the earthly in this painting remains a reference model in the history of art, reflecting Raphael's ability to transform biblical stories into images of unparalleled beauty. Number 48. The Massacre of the Innocents. Circa 1510. In the context of the 16th century, when Renaissance art was in full swing and engravings were gaining popularity as a means of artistic dissemination, Rafael Sanzio designed The Massacre of the Innocents, one of the most intense and heartbreaking compositions of his career. This engraving, executed by Marcantonio Raimondi based on Raphael's design, depicts one of the most tragic episodes of the New Testament: Herod's order to kill all children under the age of 2 in Bethlehem. Unlike his paintings of serene Madonnas and portraits, here Raphael shows a more dramatic and energetic side, capturing chaos and despair with an intensity rare in his work. From a technical point of view, the engraving stands out for its energetic composition and the masterful arrangement of the figures. The mothers, desperate to protect their children, writhe in anguished postures while the soldiers carry out Herod's order with brutality. Raphael uses a pyramidal composition in which the bodies intertwine in a chaotic manner, generating a sense of violent movement that is reinforced by the play of light and shadow. The precisely studied human anatomy and the expressiveness of the faces show Raphael's mastery in the representation of the human figure. The meticulousness of the stroke in the details, from the folds of the clothing to the tense muscles, highlights the engraver's skill and the strength of the original design. Within Raphael's legacy, this engraving holds a special place, not only for its striking content, but also for the collaboration with Marcantonio Raimondi, who contributed to the dissemination of his works throughout Europe. The narrative intensity and the ability to convey extreme emotions make it a point of reference within Renaissance graphic art. This engraving demonstrates that Raphael's mastery was not limited to painting, but also extended to the world of drawing and engraving, leaving a lasting impact on the artistic tradition. His influence was felt in later generations, who took his expressive and dynamic approach as a model for their own depictions of historical and religious subjects. Number 47. Saint Michael and the Dragon. Circa 1505. At the beginning of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio was still developing his distinctive style, influenced by the Florentine Renaissance and the Umbrian traditions that marked his training. In this context, his work Saint Michael and the Dragon emerges as a testament to the technical and narrative mastery that he would achieve in later years. Inspired by medieval tales and Christian iconography, the artist depicts the Archangel Michael at the exact moment in which he defeats the infernal beast. The composition, although dynamic, preserves a perfect harmony, with a detailed anatomical study and a masterful application of chiaroscuro that emphasizes the theatricality of the confrontation. The posture of the archangel, with his cloak floating in the air, conveys the sensation of movement and determination, while the dragon, reduced to the ground, symbolizes the triumph of good over evil. One of the most innovative aspects of this work is the use of atmospheric perspective and the detailed landscape in the background, reminiscent of the techniques employed by Leonardo da Vinci. Raphael not only focuses on the central action, but also endows the scene with an enveloping depth, allowing the viewer's eye to become lost in the immensity of the horizon. Furthermore, the vibrant colors and luminosity of Michael's figure contrast with the dark, earthy tones of the monster and the hellish landscape, visually reinforcing the idea of spiritual combat. This thoroughness in detail, from the texture of the armor to the facial expressions, is indicative of the meticulous technique that Raphael would perfect in his later commissions. Although the work is early in the artist's career, it already demonstrates his ability to combine drama with classical elegance. The theme of Saint Michael was a recurring one in the history of art, but Raphael's interpretation is distinguished by its refinement and delicacy in execution. Curiously, This painting had such an impact that it was the subject of several versions and studies over the centuries, being appreciated both for its aesthetic value and for the complex symbolism it contains. Number 46. Madonna of Casa Tempi. From 1507 to 1508. At the height of his Florentine period, Rafael Sanzio perfected his exploration of the Marian theme with works that were notable for their tenderness and naturalism. Madonna of Casa Tempi is one of the most moving depictions of the Madonna and Child, reflecting the profound influence of Leonardo da Vinci on the composition and modeling of the figures. In this painting, the Madonna gently holds her son, bowing her head in a gesture of maternal love that conveys a sense of protection and closeness. The compositional balance and fluidity in the arrangement of the elements demonstrate the artist's mastery in constructing harmonious and emotional scenes. What makes this work exceptional is the softness with which Raphael manages to model the faces and hands, using a sfumato technique that gives the figures an almost ethereal delicacy. The diffused luminosity and chromatic warmth accentuate the feeling of serenity, moving away from the iconographic rigidity of the Middle Ages. In addition, the dark background helps to highlight the presence of the characters, focusing attention on the affectionate interaction between mother and son. Unlike other Renaissance Madonnas, here there are no secondary elements to distract the eye. Everything is concentrated on the relationship between the two figures, highlighting the human dimension of the religious theme. This painting was highly valued in its time, becoming part of important private collections, and over time it became a reference to Raphael's ability to express emotions through painting. His study of child anatomy and his ability to depict skin with such softness were revolutionary for the time. Curiously, this work laid the groundwork for some of his future compositions, consolidating the ideal of beauty and grace that would make him one of the greatest exponents of the Renaissance. Number 45. The Coronation of the Virgin, Audi altarpiece. From 1502 to 1503. At the beginning of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio was commissioned to paint an altarpiece for the Audi family, one of the most influential in Perugia. The Coronation of the Virgin, conceived in his early years, reflects the profound influence of his teacher Pietro Perugino, but at the same time anticipates the compositional maturity that would distinguish him in later years. The scene is divided into two registers. In the upper part, the Virgin Mary is received into heaven, where Christ crowns her surrounded by angels and saints in a celestial balance. In the lower part, the apostles observe the miracle with expressions of astonishment and devotion, composing a group of figures distributed with harmony and elegance. One of the most notable innovations in this work is the symmetry with which Raphael arranges the scene, ensuring that each character has an individual presence without losing the coherence of the whole. The color scheme is rich and luminous, with blues and golds emphasizing heavenly glory, while earthy tones in the lower part anchor the earthly scene. The meticulous rendering of the folds of the garments and the subtle gradation of light are characteristics that anticipate the technical refinement he would achieve in his Roman period. Compared to similar works of the period, this painting stands out for the fluidity with which the figures interact, endowing the visual narrative with a dynamism that breaks with the rigidity of medieval compositions. This altarpiece not only consolidated Raphael's reputation in Perugia, but also demonstrated his ability to fuse Renaissance monumentality with a unique pictorial sensibility. Over time, his interpretation of the Coronation of the Virgin influenced other artists, setting a model for later depictions of the subject. Curiously, this work marked the beginning of a series of religious commissions that would lead him to work in some of the most prestigious chapels in Italy, laying the groundwork for his definitive consecration at the papal court. Number 44. The Tapestries of the Sistine Chapel. From 1515 to 1516. At the beginning of the 16th century, Renaissance art reached one of its most sublime moments with the creation of the Sistine Chapel tapestries, commissioned by Pope Leo X to decorate this emblematic Vatican complex. The task of designing the compositions was entrusted to Rafael Sanzio, who, at the height of his career, conceived a series of cartoons with exceptional technical and narrative refinement. These pieces were sent to Brussels, where the workshop of Peter van Aelst, one of the most prestigious in the art of tapestry, translated them into textiles of grandiose complexity. The Flemish manufacture used gold and silk threads, endowing each scene with a luminous richness that competed with Michelangelo's frescoes in the same chapel. From an artistic point of view, the series constitutes a masterpiece of composition and color, as Raphael managed to transfer the monumentality of fresco painting to the tapestry without losing the narrative fluidity. Each tapestry represents episodes from the Acts of the Apostles, highlighting the authority of Peter and Paul as pillars of Christianity. The anatomical precision of the figures, the sculptural modeling of the bodies, and the masterful use of perspective demonstrate Raphael's mastery in the representation of space. Despite the technical limitations of the textile medium, the artist was able to capture lighting and emotional effects with astonishing naturalness. The impact of this series transcended its immediate liturgical context and reaffirmed Raphael as the most influential painter of his generation. His narrative approach and compositional clarity set a precedent for decorative painting in Europe, influencing later artists. Although the series was damaged and lost over time, the legacy of its cartoons, now housed in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, remains a testament to Raphael's monumental vision. It is fascinating that, despite being conceived for the ephemeral solemnity of papal ceremonies, these tapestries have survived for centuries as an undisputed pinnacle of Renaissance art. Number 43. The Madonna of the Rose. Circa 1518. In the final years of his life, Rafael Sanzio refined his conception of the Marian image with the Madonna of the Rose, one of his most balanced and harmonious compositions. This work, produced around 1518 AD, encapsulates the artist's stylistic maturity and his mastery in depicting maternal tenderness. The scene shows the Madonna with the child Jesus, accompanied by Saint John the Baptist and Saint Joseph, in a pyramidal composition that emphasizes the connection between the figures through carefully orchestrated glances and gestures. The delicacy with which Raphael models the faces and hands denotes an unparalleled sensitivity, capturing a transcendent serenity that distinguishes his Madonnas. One of the most notable aspects of this painting is its treatment of color and light. The palette of soft, warm tones reinforces the feeling of harmony, while the lighting gives the figures an ethereal presence. The subtle gradation of colors and the perfect integration of the characters in the space are proof of the influence of Leonardo da Vinci, whose sfumato Raphael knew how to adapt with his own refinement. The atmosphere in which the figures are inserted is serene, with a landscape in the background that gives depth and balance to the composition. The inclusion of the rose in the work, a detail that gives the painting its name, adds a delicate symbolism, as this flower has historically been associated with the Virgin Mary and her role in Christian redemption. This painting not only established Raphael as the great master of religious painting in the 16th century, but also exemplified his ability to synthesize influences without losing his artistic identity. The work, which once belonged to the collection of Philip IV of Spain, is now in the Museo del Prado, where it continues to captivate those who seek in art the perfect union between technique and spirituality. It is interesting to note that although Raphael died shortly after its creation, His influence endured in generations of artists who sought to replicate his ideal of balanced beauty. Number 42. The Vision of Ezekiel, 1518. In 1518 AD, Rafael Sanzio executed one of his most dynamic and symbolic compositions, the Vision of Ezekiel. In this small but intense work, the artist tackled a theme from the Old Testament with an expressive force that distances it from the serene tone of his Madonnas and brings it closer to an almost apocalyptic grandeur. Inspired by the vision of the prophet Ezekiel, who describes the divine manifestation through a complex celestial iconography, Raphael condenses in a small space a display of power and energy unprecedented in his pictorial production. The drama of the scene is reinforced by the arrangement of the figures in an ascending movement that directs the viewer's gaze towards the central figure of God the Father, surrounded by cherubs and winged creatures. The composition is structured around a visual pyramid, with intense lighting that highlights the divine radiance in contrast to the darkness of the background. This use of light recalls Venetian painting of the period and in some ways anticipates the lighting effects of the Baroque. The tense musculature of the angels and the power of chiaroscuro reflect a profound knowledge of anatomy and the dynamics of movement, aspects that Raphael assimilated from both classical art and Michelangelo. Although the work was conceived in a smaller format compared to his large frescoes, its visual and symbolic impact is undeniable. The intensity of the scene and the mastery of the composition make it a unique piece within his repertoire, demonstrating his versatility and ability to adapt to different thematic registers. Today, the Vision of Ezekiel is preserved in the Palatine Gallery of the Pitti Palace in Florence, where it continues to fascinate with its bold combination of spirituality and dynamism. Curiously, despite its small size, this work has been considered by some critics to be one of the most monumental in intention within Raphael's pictorial corpus. Number 41. Portrait of a Young Man, circa 1514. In the artistic landscape of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio consolidated his legacy with works of great mastery, among them Portrait of a Young Man, a lost painting that nevertheless left its mark on art history. This piece is believed to have been made around 1514 AD, at a period when Raphael was at the height of his career in Rome, under the patronage of the popes. During this stage, the artist not only undertook ambitious architectural undertakings and frescoes in the Vatican, but also produced portraits of remarkable sophistication. This particular work has become one of the most enigmatic in his catalog, as its whereabouts are unknown, and only later descriptions and copies survive that attempt to reconstruct its appearance. The portrait, like many of Raphael's paintings in this period, exhibited a refined treatment of the human figure, with exceptional attention to detail in the subject's dress and expression. The harmony in the composition and use of light reflected his mastery of chiaroscuro and his influence from Leonardo da Vinci. The depiction of the youth, with an introspective gaze and serene pose, indicated the characteristic sensibility of the Urbino master. Although the identity of the young man portrayed remains a mystery, some historians have suggested that he might have been a member of the papal court or a disciple of Raphael himself. The fate of this work is made even more intriguing by the historical events that led to its disappearance. It is known to have been part of private collections and may have been stolen or destroyed during later conflicts in Europe. Despite the uncertainty surrounding its current existence, its impact lives on through historical records and copies made by later artists. The idea of a lost Raphael masterpiece only adds to its mythical aura within the art world, demonstrating how beauty transcends time even when its tangible form fades away. Number 40. Madonna of Loreto, circa 1510. By the early 16th century, Rafael Sanzio had become the undisputed master of religious painting, managing to capture in his compositions a balance between devotion, humanity, and idealized beauty. Among his most celebrated works from this period is the Madonna of Loreto, painted around 1510 AD, a period when his art was reaching unprecedented refinement. Probably commissioned by high-ranking members of the clergy, this work depicted the Madonna and Child in a scene of intimate tenderness, capturing spirituality with a naturalness that only Raphael could achieve. The technical mastery in this painting is undeniable. Raphael worked with a softness in the contours and a luminosity in the skin of his figures that evoked the influence of Leonardo da Vinci, while also incorporating his own idealized vision. The composition is perfectly balanced, with the Virgin holding the Christ child, who plays with a veil, a symbol of his future sacrifice. The warm and harmonious colors stand out against a dark background, accentuating the presence of the sacred figures and giving them an air of divinity. The expression of the Virgin, serene but melancholic, conveys the premonition of her son's fate, a common characteristic of Raphael's Madonnas. Over the centuries, this painting has been the object of admiration and devotion, being reproduced on countless occasions and preserved as one of the jewels of sacred art. Its history has also been marked by episodes of danger, as in times of conflict it was moved and protected with extreme care. Today, it is in the Condé Museum in Chantilly, where it remains a benchmark of Renaissance art and an example of Raphael's ability to transform the everyday into the sublime. His mastery in fusing the human and the divine is what has guaranteed his everlasting legacy. Number 39. The Prophet Isaiah, 1512. In the 16th century, Raphael not only established himself as an outstanding painter, but also as a master of fresco painting, a technique in which he achieved unrivaled perfection. The prophet Isaiah, executed in 1512 AD, is one of his most notable creations in this format. Located in the Church of San Agostino in Rome, this fresco was commissioned by the influential banker Johannes Goritz, who wished to embellish his chapel with a powerful representation of the biblical prophet. In this work, Raphael captures the majesty and psychological depth of Isaiah, one of the most imposing figures in the Old Testament. The fresco is notable for the monumentality of the figure of the prophet, who is presented with an expression of strength and contemplation, surrounded by inscriptions that refer to his messianic prophecies. Raphael, with his characteristic mastery of drawing and anatomy, gives Isaiah a sculptural vigor that recalls the influence of Michelangelo, with whom he indirectly competed on the Roman scene. However, unlike the dramatic intensity of the Florentine, Raphael introduces a softness in the gestures and a harmony in the chromatic palette that make his style unmistakable. The richness of the folds in the clothing and the subtle use of color reinforce the solemnity of the figure, elevating it to an almost ethereal dimension. The most fascinating thing about this work is its relationship to the frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, completed by Michelangelo shortly before Raphael completed this work. The possible inspiration that the young master took from his contemporary demonstrates his ability to absorb influences and transform them into a language of his own. The inscription that accompanies the image, written in Latin, reinforces the prophetic message of Isaiah, connecting the Hebrew tradition with Christianity. Over the centuries, this fresco has been subject to restorations that have allowed it to preserve its original splendor, ensuring that the strength of its message and Raphael's genius remain intact. Number 38. The Little Cowper Madonna, circa 1505. In the context of the Italian Renaissance, art experienced a revival in the depiction of the ideal of beauty and harmony. Rafael Sanzio, an undisputed master of this period, masterfully captured sweetness and grace in his Madonnas, turning them into symbols of serenity and perfection. The Little Cowper Madonna, created in the 16th century, reflects the influence of Leonardo da Vinci and Perugino on Raphael's work, but with a distinctive touch that separates him from his predecessors. The painting shows the Virgin Mary with the infant Jesus in a serene landscape, capturing an unmatched tenderness in Mary's maternal gaze and the child's carefree expression. This work not only represents the religious devotion characteristic of the Renaissance, but also stands out for the emotional warmth it conveys. Raphael's technique in this painting demonstrates his mastery of sfumato and the masterful use of color, elements that give a sense of depth and softness to the composition. The soft light that surrounds the figures emphasizes their delicacy, while the careful arrangement of reddish and blue tones in the Virgin's clothing provides visual balance and symbolism. The background, with a peaceful and well-defined landscape, provides an atmosphere of tranquility that reinforces the image of purity and maternal love. Despite its relatively small size, the richness of detail and perfection of execution make this work one of the most refined in Raphael's early production. This painting marks a key moment in the painter's artistic evolution, as it shows his transition from apprentice to master in his own right. The small Cowper Madonna was not only appreciated in its time, but remains one of the most representative images of the idealized vision of the Virgin that Raphael would perfect in later works. Over the centuries, its refined execution and the aura of serenity it exudes have cemented its place as one of the most admired pieces of his legacy. The painting, which owes its name to the English collector who owned it in the 18th century, has remained in prestigious exhibitions, cementing its position in art history as an unrivaled display of Raphael's genius. Number 37. The Holy Family, the Pearl. 1518. The 16th century saw Rafael Sanzio establish himself as one of the most influential artists of the Renaissance, and the Holy Family, La Perla, is one of his most emblematic works from this mature period. Commissioned during a period when the painter had mastered monumental composition and harmonic balance, this painting reflects his mastery in depicting idealized beauty and human connection. It depicts a scene in which the Virgin Mary tenderly holds the infant Jesus, while Saint Joseph and Saint John the Baptist look on with devotion, forming a pyramidal composition that has become a stylistic signature of the artist. The work, which was considered by Philip II of Spain to be the pearl of his collection, eventually acquired the name by which it is known today. The masterful use of chiaroscuro and the vibrant color palette allow the characters to take on an almost sculptural volume, standing out from the background with a realism evoking the teachings of Leonardo da Vinci. However, Raphael manages to infuse a characteristic softness that distinguishes him from other Renaissance masters. Each face is modeled with impressive precision, conveying subtle emotions that reveal the spiritual connection between the characters. The carefully balanced arrangement of the figures guides the viewer's gaze through the composition, ensuring a clear reading of the scene. The atmosphere of the work reinforces its sacred character, making devotion and family warmth coexist in the same pictorial space. This painting is a testament to Raphael's ability to synthesize influences and hone his own style. In the context of his career, it represents a culmination of his studies of the human figure and the interaction between characters in a naturalistic setting. The work was acquired by Spanish royalty in the 16th century and has remained one of the most valuable jewels in European collections. Its legacy endures not only in its exceptional technical execution, but in the way it manages to encapsulate the essence of familial tenderness and spirituality without resorting to artifice. Over the centuries, its nickname has only reinforced its status. Like a pearl among Raphael's works, it shines with its own unmistakable light. Number 36. Portrait of Maddalena Doni. Circa 1506. The art of portraiture in the Renaissance reached new heights with the work of Rafael Sanzio, who was able to endow his figures with exceptional psychological depth and technical refinement. Portrait of Maddalena Doni, created in the 16th century, is an example of his talent for capturing the personality of his sitters with unrivaled precision. This painting, which forms a pair with the portrait of her husband, Agnolo Doni, reflects the influence of Leonardo da Vinci on the young Raphael, particularly in the sfumato and the three-quarter pose of the sitter, similar to the famous Mona Lisa. However, Raphael stamped his own style, characterized by greater clarity in the contours and an idealized serenity that gives the figure an air of nobility. The richness of detail in Maddalena Doni's clothing and jewelry indicates her high social status, reflecting the importance of portraiture as a means of displaying the family's prestige. The intense coloring of her clothing, the fine embroidery and the elaborate pearls adorning her neck and hair reveal Raphael's meticulous attention to materials and textures. Unlike other contemporary portraits, where the expression can appear distant or rigid, Maddalena presents a steady and serene gaze, conveying confidence and presence. The background landscape, though discreet, lends a subtle depth to the composition, creating a connection between the figure and nature that recalls the innovations introduced by Leonardo. This portrait is one of Raphael's first forays into private court painting and represents a key step in his artistic development. Although the commission came from a family of Florentine merchants and not from the nobility, the painterly treatment of the work elevates the image of Maddalena to a level of distinction worthy of the aristocracy. Over time, the portrait has been recognized not only as a reflection of the refinement of its time, but also as a work in which Raphael consolidated his ability to capture the human essence with an elegance without artifice. Curiously, the Doni couple, although portrayed with great dignity, were known for their austerity in real life, making this work a fascinating testimony to the duality between image and reality. Number 35. Portrait of Agnolo Doni. Circa 1506. In the artistic context of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio consolidated his mastery of portraiture with unprecedented sensitivity. The portrait of Agnolo Doni is part of an era in which the influence of the Florentine Renaissance was at its height, with artists such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo setting the course for Italian painting. Agnolo Doni, a prosperous textile merchant and patron of the arts in Florence, commissioned this work together with the portrait of his wife, Maddalena Strozzi. The composition follows the tradition of Renaissance portraiture, where the figure is positioned half-length with a serene gaze and a landscape background that provides depth, a resource learned from Leonardo but reinterpreted with Raphael's personal stamp. The artist's technical skill is evident in the meticulous rendering of Doni's face, where every nuance of the skin and every fold of his clothing reflects a keen observation of reality. The soft lighting and subtle modeling of the face give the character a living, three-dimensional presence. Unlike other portraits of the period, Raphael achieves a balance between idealization and individuality of the character, capturing both his dignity and his humanity. The color palette is rich but harmonious, highlighting the warm tones of the skin contrasted with the deep blue of the background landscape, which intensifies the sense of volume. This work not only bears witness to Raphael's ability to capture the psychology of his subjects, but also anticipates the evolution of his style, which would reach its peak at the papal court. Curiously, the Doni couple not only commissioned this portrait, but also acquired Michelangelo's famous Tondo Doni, revealing their commitment to the art of their time. Agnolo Doni's portrait remains an exceptional testimony to the art of portraiture in the Renaissance, fusing the influence of his predecessors with a grace and elegance that only Raphael could achieve. Number 34. Portrait of Elisabetta Gonzaga, circa 1504. At the beginning of the 16th century, the court of Urbino was an epicenter of culture and refinement, where painting and literature intertwined to shape an ideal vision of Renaissance humanism. It was in this setting that Rafael Sanzio, still in his youth, painted the portrait of Elisabetta Gonzaga, one of the most influential figures of the Italian nobility. Elisabetta, Duchess of Urbino and wife of Guidobaldo da Montefeltro, was a woman admired for her intellect and sophistication, and this portrait reflects her character through a restrained aesthetic. The depiction does not seek conventional beauty, but rather conveys an austere dignity and introspective intelligence that were considered essential virtues in a lady of her rank. Technically, the painting demonstrates Raphael's early mastery of portraiture, with a detailed treatment of the Duchess's fabrics, jewelry, and hairstyle. The exceptionally soft lighting delicately models the face without resorting to dramatic contrasts. The dark background accentuates Elisabetta's presence, giving her a solemnity reminiscent of the portraits of the great Flemish masters, whose influence Raphael naturally assimilated. Her gaze, firm but serene, seems to penetrate the canvas, establishing a silent dialogue with the viewer and evoking a firm and reflective personality. This portrait not only reflects the young Raphael's skill, but also documents the importance of women in Renaissance courts as figures of power and intellect. Elisabetta Gonzaga was a patron of the arts and played a central role in the cultural life of Urbino, which reinforces the relevance of this painting within the historical context. Curiously, despite the elegance of her figure, her beauty is said to have been unconventional, something that Raphael was able to translate into an image where the inner strength of the Duchess prevails over the aesthetic canons of the time. Number 33. The Anside Madonna, 1505. Within 16th century sacred art, Rafael Sanzio achieved a perfect synthesis between spirituality and formal harmony, as evidenced in the Anside Madonna. Commissioned for the Anside family chapel in the Church of San Fiorenzo in Perugia, this work reflects the strong influence of Pietro Perugino, Raphael's teacher, especially in the serenity of the figures and the compositional structure. The scene follows a balanced pyramidal scheme, with the Madonna in the center holding the infant Jesus, accompanied by Saint John the Baptist and Saint Nicholas of Bari. The symmetry and order that characterize the composition convey a sense of peace, reinforced by the clarity of the color and the delicacy of the details. One of the most notable aspects of this painting is its impeccable use of perspective. The architecture in the background, with columns framing the scene and a clear sky stretching out to the horizon, creates a spatial depth that accentuates the monumentality of the figures. Chromatic richness is another essential characteristic of the work. The deep blue tones of the Virgin's cloak contrast with the warm reds of her tunic, achieving a vibrant interplay of colors that reinforces the composition. The Virgin's expression is serene and meditative, reflecting an idealized motherhood, far removed from any unnecessary drama. This painting represents a crucial point in Raphael's career, marking the transition between his formative years in Umbria and his maturity in Florence and Rome. The precision of the drawing and the grace of the composition anticipate his evolution towards a more dynamic and expressive style. Curiously, the Anside Madonna is in the National Gallery in London, and its extraordinary state of preservation has allowed the most minute details, such as the fine inscriptions on the Virgin's throne, to remain visible, providing a privileged insight into Raphael's technical mastery. Number 32. The Madonna of the Carnations, circa 1506 and 1507. In the context of the Italian Renaissance of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio was establishing himself as one of the most outstanding exponents of sacred art. The Madonna of the Carnations, painted between 1506 and 1507 AD, represents the artist's technical maturity and stylistic refinement. In this work, Raphael takes up the iconographic tradition of the Madonna and Child, but endows it with a freshness and harmony that differentiate it from its predecessors. The scene is imbued with sweetness and naturalness, with a balanced composition in which Mary holds the baby Jesus with palpable delicacy. The expression of the Virgin conveys a serene tenderness, while the childlike gesture of the child, extending his hand towards the carnations, introduces an element of subtle religious symbolism. Technically, the painting reflects Raphael's mastery of the use of sfumato, a technique perfected by Leonardo da Vinci, which allows for smooth transitions between light and shadow. The mastery of chiaroscuro is evident in the softness of the contours and the luminosity that envelops the figures. The colors, in particular the red and blue tones that clothe the Virgin, contrast with the softness of the background, creating an ethereal atmosphere that enhances the spirituality of the image. The meticulousness with which Raphael works every detail, from the texture of the fabrics to the delicacy of the facial features, demonstrates his concern for formal perfection and idealized beauty. This work is fundamental to Raphael's career, as it summarizes the advances he made during his stay in Florence, where he studied the work of the great Renaissance masters in depth. The Madonna of the Carnations represents a decisive step towards the fullness of his style, uniting the influence of Perugino with the innovations of Leonardo and Michelangelo. The choice of carnations, which traditionally symbolize love and sacrifice, adds a prophetic dimension to the scene, anticipating the tragic destiny of Christ. This painting, appreciated today for its visual harmony and profound lyricism, is an unequivocal example of Raphael's unique sensitivity. Number 31. Paula Colonna, Madonna and Child enthroned with saints. Circa 1504. At the beginning of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio was beginning to define his artistic identity within the Renaissance panorama. Paula Colonna, painted around 1504 AD, represents one of his first forays into altar painting, a genre in which he would demonstrate his ability to combine devotion, balance, and beauty. This monumental work, commissioned for a religious community, reflects the strong influence of his teacher Perugino, but also reveals the distinctive features that would make him a reference in the High Renaissance. The composition is rigorously symmetrical, with the Virgin and Child enthroned in the center, surrounded by saints who reinforce the solemnity of the ensemble. The carefully constructed perspective guides the gaze towards the throne, giving it an aura of majesty without detracting from the sweetness of the maternal figure. The treatment of light and color is one of the most notable aspects of the work. Raphael uses a warm and luminous palette that unifies the scene, with golden and red tones that emphasize the divinity of the central characters. The delicacy in the representation of the faces and hands, as well as the softness of the folds of the clothing, demonstrate his technical skill and his search for formal perfection. Each figure is carefully positioned within the pictorial space, creating a sense of visual harmony that characterizes his production. The sfumato used in the contours and the three-dimensional effect of the architecture in the background reinforce the depth of the scene, demonstrating his precocious mastery of perspective and composition. Although it was one of his first major works, Paula Colonna already foreshadows the greatness that he would achieve in his later years. The serenity of the Virgin, the elegance of the postures, and the atmosphere of solemnity anticipate the qualities that would make Raphael the painter of grace and harmony. The influence of Perugino is evident, but so is the evolution of his style towards greater naturalness and dynamism. This painting, in addition to being a key piece in his artistic training, consolidated his reputation as a master of sacred art and paved the way for the great altarpieces that he would later create in Rome. Number 30. The Liberation of St. Peter, 1514. By the early 16th century, Rafael Sanzio had already established himself as one of the most prestigious artists of the Italian Renaissance. The Liberation of St. Peter, completed in 1514 AD, is one of the most striking religious scenes he painted for the Vatican apartments. Commissioned by Pope Leo X, this work forms part of the decoration of the Heliodorus room and depicts an episode from the New Testament, in which St. Peter is freed from prison by an angel. The scene is divided into 3 narrative moments within the same architectural space: the cell illuminated by a supernatural light, the sleeping soldiers, and the exit of the apostle guided by his heavenly liberator. The way in which Raphael articulates these scenes within the composition is a masterful demonstration of his narrative ability and his mastery of visual language. From a technical point of view, this work stands out for its innovative treatment of light. Raphael introduces a play of illumination never before seen in his work: the natural light of the moon, the glow of the angel, and the torches of the soldiers generate contrasts that give drama to the scene. The luminosity emanating from the angel envelops St. Peter in a mystical atmosphere, differentiating him from earthly elements. This bold experimentation with light and shadow reveals the impact of Leonardo da Vinci's work on Raphael, as well as his desire to innovate within pictorial language. The architectural perspective, with its deep openings and columns, amplifies the sensation of realism and depth, guiding the eye through the narrative of the painting. Within Raphael's oeuvre, the Liberation of St. Peter is a key work that demonstrates his evolution towards a more theatrical and expressive painting. His ability to combine the divine with the human, the celestial with the earthly, reaffirms his mastery of composition and visual drama. This work, located in an emblematic space such as the Vatican, not only consolidated his prestige as an artist of the papal court, but also influenced later generations of painters. The atmosphere of the scene, with its masterful use of light, generated such an impact that it became a reference model for Baroque art, anticipating the visual intensity of Caravaggio and Rembrandt. Number 29. The Fire of the Borgo, 1514. At the beginning of the 16th century, the city of Rome was experiencing a period of artistic and religious splendor under the patronage of the Renaissance popes. Within this context, Rafael Sanzio was commissioned to decorate the Vatican rooms, spaces that today represent the peak of his pictorial genius. The Fire in the Borgo, completed in 1514 AD, is one of the most spectacular works in this series, notable for its narrative drama and its masterful handling of human anatomy. The painting, conceived as part of the stanza dell'Incendio di Borgo, recounts an episode that occurred in the 9th century, when a fire threatened to consume the Borgo, a neighborhood near St. Peter's Basilica. According to tradition, Pope Leo IV, through a miraculous blessing, managed to extinguish the flames, thus saving the city. This event served Raphael as the starting point for a composition that combines dynamism, expressiveness, and a profound sense of the heroic. From a technical point of view, the work is one of Raphael's most daring. The arrangement of the figures in interconnected groups creates a whirlwind of movement that guides the viewer's gaze through the scene. The use of pronounced foreshortening, especially in the muscular figures trying to escape the flames, reflects the influence of Michelangelo, with whom Raphael maintained a relationship of artistic rivalry. However, unlike the heightened drama of his contemporary, Raphael achieves a compositional balance that confers harmony even in the midst of chaos. The classical architecture in the background frames the action and reinforces the feeling of solidity, while the play of light and shadow accentuates the drama of the moment. The impact of the fire in the Borgo on art history is undeniable. This painting cemented Raphael's reputation as a master of pictorial storytelling and demonstrated his ability to fuse history, architecture, and the human figure into an unprecedented aesthetic unity. Although the work was completed in collaboration with his assistants, the design and artistic vision are undeniably his own. Its legacy transcends the religious realm and stands as a testament to Renaissance virtuosity. The intensity of the expressions, the tense musculature, and the frenzy of the composition have served as inspiration for generations of artists, from the Mannerists to the neoclassicists. Number 28. The Miraculous Catch of Fish. From the year 1515 to the year 1516. By the mid-16th century, Rafael Sanzio was establishing himself as one of the most important artists of his time, working on a number of papal commissions that would define the splendor of the Renaissance. Among his most impressive works is the Miraculous Catch of Fish, created between 1515 and 1516 AD as part of the cartoons intended for the tapestries of the Sistine Chapel. Depicting the biblical episode in which Jesus guides Peter and other fishermen to an extraordinary catch, this piece is a masterful example of Raphael's mastery of composition and expressiveness of the human figure. What distinguishes the miraculous catch is its complex spatial structure and the perfect integration of the figures with the landscape. The scene takes place in a serene body of water, where the arrangement of the characters creates a dynamic balance. The anatomy of the fishermen, in full effort to pull in their nets, reveals a detailed study of movement, while the reflections on the water's surface provide depth and realism. The treatment of the light, which seems to radiate from the figure of Christ, generates a mystical aura that enhances the spiritual dimension of the work. The interaction of glances and gestures is remarkable, emphasizing the miraculous nature of the event without resorting to exaggerated drama. This work is fundamental within Raphael's artistic corpus, as it demonstrates his ability to synthesize classical monumentality and fluid narrative. The series of cartoons for tapestries, of which The Miraculous Catch is a part, was commissioned by Pope Leo X with the purpose of decorating the Sistine Chapel, reinforcing the message of divine authority that the Church sought to project in that period. Although the tapestries were made in Flanders by the workshops of Peter van Aelst, Raphael's original conception is unmistakable. The chromatic richness, the precision of the gestures, and the balanced composition confirm his unparalleled genius. The resulting tapestry, woven with gold and silk threads, became one of the most admired pieces of its time, reflecting the perfect union between ecclesiastical art and Renaissance splendor. Number 27. The Mass of Bolsena, 1512. At the beginning of the 16th century, religious art in Rome was undergoing a transformation, with painting taking on an essential role in the exaltation of faith. Within this context, Rafael Sanzio, supported by Pope Julius II, undertook the decoration of the Vatican apartments, a commission that would consolidate his reputation as a Renaissance master. The Mass at Bolsena, painted in 1512 AD, is one of the most emblematic works of this cycle. It represents the miracle that occurred in the 13th century, when a Bohemian priest, celebrating the Eucharist in the town of Bolsena, witnessed how the host began to bleed. This event was decisive in the establishment of the Feast of Corpus Christi and is portrayed by Raphael with unparalleled majesty. The composition of the work is divided into two planes that are harmoniously intertwined. In the lower part, the altar and the surprised priest are the central axis, while in the upper part, the grandiose architecture and the figures of the assistants lend solemnity to the scene. Raphael achieves exceptional mastery in the arrangement of the characters, using perspective to direct the viewer's gaze towards the miracle. The gestures of those present, which oscillate between disbelief and devotion, are represented with a detail that enhances the emotional charge of the work. Particularly noteworthy is the figure of Pope Julius II, who, although he was not present at the historic event, is included as a witness, reinforcing papal legitimacy in the Christian tradition. The Mass at Bolsena is a paradigmatic example of Raphael's mature style, where formal elegance and narrative clarity reach their highest expression. His ability to express spirituality through pictorial language is evident in the subtle modulation of light, which gives the scene an aura of transcendence. This work not only strengthened the connection between art and liturgy, but also influenced the later representation of Eucharistic miracles in religious painting. Each character, each fold in the clothing, and each look contribute to the solemnity of the scene, making it one of the most admired works of the Renaissance. Number 26. Saint George and the Dragon, circa 1505. In a context of artistic and cultural effervescence that defined the Italian Renaissance, Rafael Sanzio painted Saint George and the Dragon, a masterpiece that illustrates the fusion between idealized elegance and heroic narrative. In the 16th century, the court of Urbino, where Raphael trained, was a center of intellectual and artistic exchange that significantly influenced his development. The painting was commissioned by Guidobaldo da Montefeltro, who was probably looking for an image of virtue and courage to give to Henry VII of England. The story depicted, taken from the Golden Legend, embodies the struggle between good and evil, a recurring theme in the religious and chivalric art of the period. From a technical point of view, the work demonstrates Raphael's mastery of composition and use of color. The scene is a marvel of dynamism, with St. George in full motion, mounted on a horse with defined muscles, while he thrusts his lance into the dragon. The atmospheric perspective, learned from the studies of Leonardo da Vinci, gives depth to the landscape in the background. The richness of the detail in the armor reflects the influence of Flemish painters, whose work was widely appreciated in 16th century Italy. Raphael combines Renaissance balance with dramatic gestures that give intensity to the story, achieving a work of great visual and symbolic impact. The painting is a testament to Raphael's precocious talent and his ability to absorb influences without losing his own style. The elegance of the figures and the clarity of the composition anticipate his artistic maturity, where he would achieve an even more refined synthesis between naturalism and idealization. Despite his youth at the time of this work, Raphael already demonstrated a skill that would place him among the greatest of the Renaissance. A fascinating detail is the shield with the insignia of the Order of the Garter, subtle but significant, as it confirms the connection between this commission and English royalty, an indication of how Renaissance art was also a means of diplomacy between the powerful in Europe. Number 25. Portrait of Bindo Altaviti, circa 1515. During the 16th century, the portrait took on an unprecedented value in Renaissance society, reflecting not only the status of the sitter but also his intellect and character. Portrait of Bindo Altaviti, painted by Rafael Sanzio around 1515 AD, is a supreme example of this genre. Bindo Altaviti, a banker of Florentine origin established in Rome, was an influential figure in the financial world and a notable patron of the arts. His portrait departs from the conventions of static and solemn representation of the time, displaying an intimacy and liveliness that reveal the artist's virtuosity. In a society where personal image was key in the projection of power and influence, Raphael manages to convey not only the youth and beauty of the sitter, but also his refinement and intellectual status. Technically, the painting is a display of painterly sensitivity and mastery of chiaroscuro. The light gently shapes the young banker's face, highlighting the delicacy of his features with a precision that recalls the meticulousness of Leonardo da Vinci. The blonde hair, worked with fine brushstrokes, and the melancholic gaze that projects beyond the viewer give the portrait an emotional intensity unusual for the time. The dark background contrasts with the luminosity of the face, further highlighting its presence. The twist of the body and the natural gesture of the head suggest a captured moment, an approach that would profoundly influence the evolution of the portrait in Western painting. Rafael Sanzio, at the height of his career in Rome, here demonstrates his ability to imbue his figures with palpable humanity without sacrificing the idealization characteristic of the High Renaissance. Often misattributed to Titian in the past, this work is one of the most refined expressions of psychological portraiture in Renaissance painting. What is most intriguing is that, although a private commission, Altaviti's portrait would end up being rediscovered centuries later as a visual testament to the cultural and financial splendor of 16th century Rome, where art and economic power went hand in hand. Number 24. La Vellata. From 1515 to 1516. At the height of his artistic maturity, Rafael Sanzio painted La Vellata, one of his most sublime depictions of female beauty and his absolute mastery of portraiture. In the 16th century, the painting of idealized figures reached its zenith with artists such as Raphael, who managed to balance naturalism with ideal perfection. This work, executed between 1515 and 1516 AD, is a testament to his ability to capture grace and refinement in his sitters. The woman depicted is thought to be the same model who inspired his La Fornerina, possibly Margherita Luti, although the exact identity remains a matter of debate. Regardless of her identity, La Vellata stands as a paradigm of the Renaissance feminine ideal. In technical terms, the painting is an example of mastery in the handling of light and color. The woman's face, of extraordinary delicacy, is modeled with subtle transitions of shadows that give it an almost sculptural volume. Her gaze, serene but profound, creates an immediate connection with the viewer. The richness of the fabrics, especially the white cloth that gives the work its name, demonstrates Raphael's ability to represent textures with unparalleled precision. The gilding of the dress, worked with a loose but meticulous brushstroke, reflects the influence of Venetian portraits, although with the unmistakable Roman delicacy that defines his style. This work not only represents a technical achievement, but also symbolizes the Renaissance concept of the donna ideale, in which external beauty is a reflection of internal virtue. Raphael, at the height of his talent, achieved here a balance between realism and aesthetic sublimation that would influence generations of later artists. Curiously, the painting was highly appreciated from its creation and never fell into oblivion, being kept in private collections until it entered the most prestigious museums. Its impeccable conservation over the centuries allows it to continue to transmit today with the same intensity the ideal of beauty and harmony that Raphael raised to perfection. Number 23. The Ecstasy of Saint Cecilia. 1516. In the 16th century, in the city of Bologna, Rafael Sanzio created the Ecstasy of Saint Cecilia, one of his most moving religious paintings. This work was commissioned for the Church of San Giovanni in Monte, reflecting the strong rise of spirituality at the time, especially within the Bolognese school. The painting depicts Saint Cecilia in a state of divine rapture, surrounded by saints such as Saint Paul, Saint John the Evangelist, St. Augustine and Mary Magdalene. This composition not only highlights Raphael's anatomical and compositional knowledge, but also reflects his evolution towards a more mature and expressive style. From a technical point of view, this work stands out for its mastery of color and its enveloping atmosphere. Raphael used a soft light that bathes the characters, creating an almost palpable feeling of spirituality. The perspective and the distribution of the figures reveal the influence of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, but with Raphael's personal stamp, a perfect harmony in the arrangement of the elements. At the feet of Saint Cecilia, a set of broken musical instruments symbolizes the transition from the earthly to the divine, a visual resource that enriches the depth of the message. Throughout history, this painting has been admired for its ability to capture the saint's transcendental emotion. It was taken to Paris during the Napoleonic campaigns, but later returned to Bologna, where it remains in the Pinacoteca Nazionale. The influence of Renaissance classicism can be perceived in its chromatic palette and in the gestures of the characters, with an idealized beauty that has made this work one of Raphael's most emblematic works. In particular, the expression of Saint Cecilia, with her eyes turned to heaven and an unwavering serenity, has been a model of reference for many later artists. Number 22. Madonna di Foligno. From 1511 to 1512. Between 1511 and 1512, Rafael Sanzio painted Madonna di Foligno, one of his most monumental compositions in the field of sacred conversations. This work was commissioned by Sigismondo de' Conti, secretary of Pope Julius II, as a form of gratitude for having survived a lightning strike at his home in Foligno. The painting was originally conceived for the Church of Santa Maria in Araceli in Rome and later moved to the Basilica of San Francesco in Foligno, which gave it its present name. The painting shows the Madonna and Child enthroned on a bank of clouds, surrounded by Saint John the Baptist, Saint Francis of Assisi, Saint Jerome and Sigismondo de' Conti himself, who appears in an attitude of prayer. Raphael used a pyramidal composition, with a detailed study of the gestures and gazes that direct attention towards the celestial figure. The use of light and color lend an ethereal character to the scene, while the presence of a child angel in the center adds a point of visual balance. The precision with which Raphael worked the faces and clothing reveals his extraordinary mastery of drawing and his ability to bring each character to life. Over the centuries, this painting has been valued for its dynamism and innovative treatment of space. Rather than using an architectural background, Raphael opted for an open landscape, reinforcing the sense of spaciousness and transcendence. During the Napoleonic invasion, the work was taken to Paris, although it later returned to Italy, where it is now in the Vatican museums. A fascinating detail is the inclusion of a disk of light at the bottom of the painting, which has been interpreted by some scholars as an allusion to an extraordinary celestial phenomenon. Number 21. Madonna dell'Impanata. From 1513 to 1514. In 1513 to 14, Rafael Sanzio executed Madonna dell'Impanata, one of his most refined creations in the Marian genre. This work is named after the window with waxed cloth, impanata, in the background of the composition, an architectural detail that reinforces the sense of depth and realism. Commissioned in the context of Papal Rome, the painting reflects Raphael's stylistic maturity in the last decade of his life, when his work reached exceptional expressiveness and dynamism. The scene depicts the Virgin and Child in an intimate and secluded setting. Next to them are Saint Elizabeth, Saint John the Baptist as a child and Saint Catherine of Alexandria, who is holding a wheel, her iconographic symbol. Raphael achieves a perfect balance between the divine and the human, endowing the characters with a surprising naturalness. The figure's gestures establish a network of visual interactions that guide the viewer's gaze through the composition. The artist's mastery is evident in the softness of the contours, the treatment of the folds in the fabrics, and the subtle gradation of the colors. This work has been the subject of numerous studies due to its unusual composition and iconographic richness. It is believed to have been completed with the collaboration of his workshop, especially by Giulio Romano, his most prominent disciple. Today, the painting is kept in the Palatine Gallery of the Pitti Palace in Florence, where it remains one of the most admired pieces of the Renaissance. One detail that does not go unnoticed is the gaze between Saint Elizabeth and the little Saint John, which seems to contain a premonitory message about the child's future as the precursor of Christ. Number 20. The Three Graces. From the year 1504 to the year 1505. In the middle of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio, still young but already with unrivaled pictorial skill, created the Three Graces, a work that captures the harmony and delicacy of the Renaissance ideal. Inspired by classical mythology and the representation of the goddesses of beauty, the painter managed to capture the elegance of the human body with exceptional virtuosity. The theme of the three linked female figures comes from the Greco-Latin tradition, but Raphael endows it with a chromatic softness and anatomical precision that enhance the sensation of movement and fluidity. His study of ancient sculpture is evident in the naturalness of the poses and the subtle interaction between the figures, where light and shadow are masterfully distributed to accentuate their forms. This painting is a clear reflection of Raphael's technical mastery, who at this stage of his career had already developed a refined style, influenced by Perugino but with its own identity. The composition is balanced in a perfect triangle, with an exquisite tonal transition that gives depth to the scene. The warmth of the color palette and the meticulous representation of the figure's skin give a sensation of almost palpable touch, something uncommon in the art of the period. In addition, the fusion between the landscape in the background and the characters in the foreground creates a feeling of continuity, expanding the dimension of the work and achieving a surprising visual harmony. One of the most fascinating aspects of this piece is its probable connection to the court of Urbino, where humanist influence encouraged the study of classical antiquity. This depiction of idealized beauty had a significant impact on the development of Renaissance art, consolidating Raphael as a master in the representation of grace and formal perfection. The painting, although inspired by the Greco-Latin tradition, possesses a unique freshness that maintains it as one of the most iconic images in the Western artistic canon. Number 19. Vision of a Night, 1504. In 1504, at the height of the Italian Renaissance, Rafael Sanzio painted one of his first masterpieces, Vision of a Night. Despite its small format, this painting contains powerful symbolism and compositional depth that reveals the artist's early talent. The scene depicts a young knight dozing under a tree, while two female figures emerge at his sides offering him different attributes, a sword and a book. This duality has been interpreted as the choice between the life of virtue and that of pleasure, a theme of great importance in 16th-century humanist philosophy. The composition of the work is symmetrical and meticulously balanced, with a landscape in the background that provides a sense of serenity and spatial depth. Despite his youth, Raphael demonstrates an absolute mastery of color and light, using a soft palette that gives the scene a dreamlike and contemplative air. The carefully detailed clothing of the figures reflects the influence of his teacher Perugino, but with a greater fluidity in the lines and a naturalness that anticipates his artistic maturity. The choice of blue and red in the clothing of the female figures highlights the symbolic charge of their roles, differentiating virtue from pleasure with masterful chromatic subtlety. One of the most intriguing elements of this painting is its connection to the medieval allegorical tradition, fused with the compositional clarity of the Renaissance. The image not only depicts a moral dilemma, but also suggests a state of introspection and personal quest, something that resonated deeply in the intellectual culture of the time. Although Raphael would later develop a grander and more dynamic style, this early work already contains the essence of his genius, the ability to endow his characters with life and psychological depth. Number 18. Madonna del Granduca, circa 1505. Around 1505, Rafael Sanzio created one of his most delicate depictions of the Virgin Mary, Madonna del Granduca, a painting that embodies purity and serenity with absolute perfection. Named after its owner in later centuries, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, this work is an outstanding example of the Renaissance ideal of beauty and balance. The Madonna appears wrapped in a dark blue cloak, holding the child with infinite tenderness, while the neutral background highlights the atmosphere of intimacy and devotion. The composition is restrained and elegant, with a focus on the relationship between mother and child, without unnecessary distractions. One of the most remarkable aspects of this work is the softness of the modeling, achieved using the sfumato technique, which Raphael probably learned from the influence of Leonardo da Vinci. The blurred contours and subtle transition of light and shadow give the figures an ethereal three-dimensionality, accentuating the sweetness of the Virgin's expression. Unlike other more elaborate Madonnas by the artist, here Raphael opts for a more intimate and restrained representation, eliminating ornamental elements to focus attention on the spirituality of the image. The luminosity of the faces and the delicacy of the details in the hands and hair demonstrate his ability to capture the essence of human beauty with unsurpassed naturalness. This work marked a crucial point in Raphael's evolution, consolidating him as one of the great masters of the Renaissance. His ability to convey emotions through simplicity and harmony was highly valued by his contemporaries and continues to captivate viewers centuries later. Curiously, Madonna del Granduca was so appreciated in its time that, according to historical accounts, it was carried with its owners on each of their trips, as if its presence provided a halo of protection and peace. Number 17. The Crucifixion Monde, from the year 1502 to the year 1503. In the early years of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio was developing a style rooted in the Quattrocento tradition, but with a freshness and sensitivity that foreshadowed the High Renaissance. The Monde Crucifixion, commissioned by a devout family in Urbino, is a testament to this transition, where Perugino's influence is manifest in the serene symmetry and delicacy of the figures. The scene, centered on the figure of Christ on the cross, follows traditional iconography, but with a treatment of space and light that anticipates Raphael's later developments. The compositional balance, marked by the calm gestures of the Virgin, Saint John the Evangelist and the saints at the foot of the cross, generates an atmosphere of calm that contrasts with the drama of the scene. Technically, the work stands out for its refined use of oil on panel, a medium that Raphael mastered with increasing mastery. The meticulous transition of colors, with the blue skies that fade into a golden horizon, creates a depth unprecedented in the compositions of his time. The anatomy of Christ, with his elongated and perfectly modeled body, reveals Raphael's knowledge of classical sculpture and the influence of Leonardesque sfumato. The symmetry and order of the work evoke a restrained spirituality, more meditative than heartbreaking, in contrast to the cruder interpretations of other contemporary artists. The impact of the Monde Crucifixion on Raphael's career is significant, as it shows the refinement of his style before he reached artistic maturity in Florence and Rome. Although the painting retains the serenity and detail of the Quattrocento, it already hints at the fluidity and harmony that would characterize his later works. It is a key piece in the artist's evolution, in which geometric balance and visual serenity begin to merge with the naturalness that would define the Renaissance ideal. The painting is known to have been in the possession of Napoleon Bonaparte, which adds an intriguing chapter to its history and underlines its relevance beyond the religious context. Number 16. Saint Catherine of Alexandria, 1507. In the middle of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio was consolidating his style in Florence, influenced by the monumentality of Michelangelo and the softness of Leonardo da Vinci's light. It was in this context that Saint Catherine of Alexandria emerged, a work that represents the Christian martyr with a dynamism unusual in the religious figures of the Quattrocento. The composition, based on a subtle but powerful twisting movement, shows the saint in an attitude of ecstasy, with her gaze raised to heaven and a gesture of serene resignation. The background, with soft and blurred tones, contributes to the heavenly atmosphere of the painting, emphasizing the mystical character of the representation. One of the most innovative aspects of the work is the twisting of the body, a clear assimilation of the contrapposto technique, which Raphael refined to give the figure a natural grace. Leonardo's influence is evident in the treatment of the contours, where sfumato softens the transitions between light and shadow, giving the face an almost ethereal delicacy. The traditional iconography of Saint Catherine appears with her most representative attribute, the Wheel of Martyrdom, barely hinted at in the composition, demonstrating Raphael's mastery in suggesting narrative elements without overloading the scene. The fluidity of the folds in the clothing and the luminous vibration that envelops the figure accentuate the Renaissance ideal of spiritualized beauty. The painting is a clear testament to Raphael's technical mastery in his Florentine period, a crucial moment in his career that would define his artistic maturity in Rome. The subtlety of expression and compositional harmony anticipate his more monumental works in the Vatican, where he would reach his greatest splendor. In her time, Saint Catherine of Alexandria was admired for its grace and impeccable execution, characteristics that have ensured its status as one of the most refined representations of the saint. Curiously, this work has been the subject of multiple radiographic studies that revealed subtle corrections in the position of the head, evidencing the meticulous search for perfection in the painting. Number 15. Portrait of Pope Leo X with Cardinals Giulio de' Medici and Luigi de' Rossi, 1518. By the end of the second decade of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio was the most influential artist in Rome, a patron of the papacy and with an established status at the Vatican court. Portrait of Pope Leo X with Cardinals Giulio de' Medici and Luigi de' Rossi is one of his masterpieces in the portrait genre, marking a milestone in the psychological representation of power. Unlike his earlier idealized portraits, here Raphael offers an image of raw realism, presenting the pontiff with a grave expression and an imposing presence. The composition, organized in a triangle, emphasizes the Pope's hierarchy, while the meticulous attention to detail in the robes and objects enhances the splendor of the Vatican court. The work stands out for its masterful use of chiaroscuro and rich textures. The hand of Leo X, resting on a heavy illuminated missal, suggests the symbolic weight of the Church and its intellectual power. The golden bell on the table is another element loaded with meaning, as it alludes to papal authority and the consistory ceremony. The treatment of the light, carefully distributed to emphasize the volumes of the faces and the folds of the clothing, provides a depth unprecedented in Renaissance portraiture. The interaction between the figures, with the cardinals in discreetly attentive attitudes, reinforces the feeling of an intimate moment captured with almost documentary precision. This portrait is a key piece in the evolution of the genre, as Raphael not only achieves a faithful representation of the characters, but also captures their psychology. Pope Leo X, with his thoughtful countenance and slightly bowed posture, conveys a sense of calculation and diplomacy that fits with his role in the European politics of the time. The painting was so influential that it served as a reference for numerous later portrait painters, establishing a model for official representations of authority. It is known that the work was in the private collection of the Medici for centuries, consolidating its prestige as a symbol of the alliance between art and political power in the Renaissance. Number 14. The Burial of Christ, 1507. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the Renaissance flourished in Italy with unprecedented splendor, and Rafael Sanzio emerged as one of the most prominent figures of this era. The Entombment of Christ, painted in 1507 AD, represents a turning point in the artist's career, who, influenced by the mastery of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, achieved a work of great drama and compositional sophistication. Inspired by the sculptural reliefs of classical antiquity and the dynamic scenes of Florentine painting, Raphael constructs a scene of profound pathos where visual narration is the central axis. In this work, the emotionality of the characters and the harmony of the composition reflect a balance between tradition and innovation, essential characteristics of his mature style. From a technical point of view, the painting is distinguished by its pyramidal composition, a device that Raphael would perfect in later works. The scene depicts a group of figures supporting the lifeless body of Christ, heading towards his tomb. The anatomical twisting of the figures and the arrangement of their gestures suggest a restrained, yet at the same time naturalistic, theatricality, evoking a feeling of genuine pain. The chromatic richness, with warm and cold tones in a harmonious combination, gives the scene a vibrant realism, while the spatial depth, achieved through the arrangement of the planes, provides an impressive three-dimensional effect. The influence of Michelangelo is evident in the musculature of the characters, while the elegance and softness of the expressions follow the line of Leonardo da Vinci. This painting not only marks the end of Raphael's time in Florence, but is also a testament to his ability to synthesize influences and elevate them to a personal level. The Entombment of Christ was commissioned by the Baglioni family of Perugia as a tribute to their deceased, adding a layer of meaning beyond the biblical scene depicted. This work would be a prelude to his monumental contribution at the Vatican, where his style would evolve into greater grandeur. Curiously, Raphael would never again tackle a subject of such dramatic intensity on this scale, thus consolidating his mastery in depicting human suffering within a framework of idealized beauty. Number 13. Portrait of Pope Julius II, from 1511 to 1512. Between 1511 and 1512 AD, Rafael Sanzio painted one of the most iconic representations of papal power, Portrait of Pope Julius II. This work arises in the context of a papacy marked by ambition and artistic renewal, at a time when the Renaissance was reaching its peak in Rome. Julius II, known as the Warrior Pope, was a patron of the arts and a political strategist who promoted the reconstruction of St. Peter's and commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel. Aware of the impact of the image in the consolidation of power, Raphael's portrait had the function not only of capturing the appearance of the pontiff, but of transmitting his authority and imposing character. Unlike conventional portraits of the period, where popes were depicted with an air of distant solemnity, Raphael introduces an innovative approach by capturing Julius II in a moment of introspection. Seated on a richly decorated throne, with his head bowed and his gaze melancholic, the pontiff seems deep in thought, which contrasts with his reputation as an energetic and combative leader. The precision in the details of the face, with pronounced wrinkles and a beard that he had grown in mourning after the loss of Bologna, provides a psychological depth unusual in portraits of the period. The coloring is another key element. The intense red of the vestments highlights the majesty of the character, while the green of the background creates a vibrant contrast that enhances the presence of the Pope. This portrait not only revolutionized papal iconography, but also influenced generations of later artists. The sobriety and naturalness with which Raphael approached the image of power set a precedent that would be taken up by artists such as Diego Velázquez in the 17th century. Furthermore, the composition became a model for official portraits of pontiffs, establishing a balance between grandeur and humanity. Curiously, this work was placed in St. Peter's Basilica to be contemplated by the faithful, an unusual fact for a papal portrait, which reinforces its impact on the public perception of the papal figure. Number 12. The Parnassus. From the year 1509 to the year 1511. Between 1509 and 1511 AD, Rafael Sanzio painted the Parnassus, one of the most emblematic works of his time at the Vatican and a manifestation of the humanist ideal of the Renaissance. This work is part of the decoration of the Stanza della Segnatura, the private library of Pope Julius II, where Raphael captured an exaltation of knowledge and the arts. In the Parnassus, poetry and music become protagonists, establishing a dialogue with philosophy and theology represented in other parts of the room. The composition takes place on the summit of Mount Parnassus, home of the god Apollo and the Muses according to classical mythology, in a scene that brings together some of the most important poets in history. From an artistic point of view, the work stands out for its visual harmony and its impeccable distribution of figures. Apollo, placed in the center, plays a golden lyre while he is surrounded by the 9 muses and a selection of poets from different periods, including Homer, Dante Alighieri, and Virgil. Raphael manages to integrate classical tradition with Renaissance sensibility by representing the characters with a naturalistic elegance and a subtle play of gestures and glances. The freshness of the colors, especially the golden and blue tones of the sky, provide an ethereal atmosphere that suggests the elevation of the spirit through art. The mastery in the use of curved perspective, adapted to the architecture of the room, demonstrates Raphael's ability to work on large-scale formats without losing delicacy in the details. Parnassus not only consolidates Raphael's reputation as a master of fresco, but also demonstrates his ability to synthesize the thought of his time into images of ideal beauty. This work, which is part of the iconographic program of the Stanza della Segnatura, establishes a symbolic connection with the School of Athens, where reason and poetry coexist in balance. Curiously, the identification of some poets in the scene has been a matter of debate for centuries, leading to multiple interpretations about Raphael's intention in including certain figures in the composition. Number 11. The Madonna del Prado, 1506. At the beginning of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio was consolidating his prestige in the city of Florence, where his art was imbued with the elegance and balance of the Renaissance. In this context, he created La Madonna del Prado, a work in which he fused classical serenity with a dynamic and harmonious composition. In the painting, the Virgin Mary tenderly looks at the little Jesus and John the Baptist, who play with the cross in a symbolic gesture of premonition of Christ's tragic destiny. The triangular arrangement of the figures and the subtlety of the lighting reflect the influence of Leonardo da Vinci, especially in the sfumato technique, which Raphael masterfully adopted to soften the contours and give depth to the scene. This oil-on panel is distinguished by its perfect balance between naturalism and idealization, an essential characteristic of Raphael's style. The delicacy of the faces, the fluidity of the gestures, and the peaceful atmosphere are testimony to his ability to infuse humanity and spirituality into his compositions. The Madonna, dressed in shades of red and blue, stands out against the landscape background that evokes the idyllic nature of the Florentine school. The children, although depicted with great childlike sweetness, already hint at their divine destiny through their interaction with the reed cross carried by John. Each element of the work is carefully arranged to convey a sense of visual and emotional harmony. Considered one of the key pieces of Raphael's Florentine period, this painting consolidated his reputation and brought him closer to the most influential circles of the Renaissance. The masterful treatment of light and composition inspired generations of later artists. Today, the Madonna del Prado is kept at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, where it remains a benchmark of the Renaissance ideal of beauty. A fascinating detail is the way in which Raphael managed to bring fabrics and skins to life through a subtle use of shadows, creating the illusion of movement and softness with impeccable technique. Number 10. The Madonna of the Chair. From 1513 to 1514. In the early years of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio reached the height of his artistic maturity, developing an unmistakable style that combined technical perfection with unparalleled tenderness. It was during this period that he painted the Madonna of the Chair, one of his most iconic and appreciated works. Unlike his previous compositions, which were dominated by more obvious geometric lines, in this painting he opted for a circular structure that highlights the unity and intimacy of the scene. Mary, dressed in a richly decorated cloak, holds Jesus with a loving and protective expression, while the child, with a serene gaze, lies confidently on her lap. To one side, Saint John the Baptist, with his dark skin and rustic clothing, looks on with devotion. The mastery of color in this work is exceptional. Raphael abandons the background landscapes in favor of a more closed and enveloping composition, where the play of light and shadow shapes the forms with great naturalism. The influence of the great Venetian masters is evident in the chromatic richness and texture of the fabrics, which seem palpable thanks to the subtlety of the nuances. The deep gaze of the Virgin, full of warmth and realism, demonstrates Raphael's ability to capture the emotional essence of his characters. The circular format, unusual in his work, reinforces the feeling of closeness and family unity, making the work seem even more intimate and moving. This painting marked a turning point in Raphael's career, consolidating his reputation as a master of composition and portraiture. Admired for its balance of solemnity and tenderness, the Madonna of the Chair has influenced many later artists, who have sought to imitate the serenity and perfection of his style. Today, it is on display in the Palatine Gallery of the Pitti Palace in Florence, where it continues to captivate those who contemplate it. One detail that distinguishes it is the naturalness with which Raphael managed to capture a moment of deep maternal connection, elevating it to an image of spiritual transcendence without losing its human warmth. Number 9. La Fornarina, around 1518 and 1520. By the end of the 16th century, Rafael Sanzio was already an established artist at the papal court in Rome, where his works reflected an unsurpassed mastery in the handling of light, anatomy, and human expression. In this context, he painted La Fornarina, a fascinating portrait that moves away from his religious compositions to delve into more intimate and personal territory. It depicts a half-naked young woman, with a captivating gaze and an enigmatic expression, who has traditionally been identified as Margherita Ludi, a Roman baker and possible lover of the painter. The delicacy with which Raphael captured her beauty and the detailed modeling of her skin have made this work one of the most talked about and enigmatic of his production. The technique used in this painting is exceptional. The carefully directed light highlights the smoothness of the young woman's skin, creating an effect of softness and volume that denotes a deep knowledge of anatomy. Her relaxed pose, with her left arm covering part of her chest and her right hand resting on her lap, conveys a subtle and restrained sensuality. The turban and the jewel that adorns her head, as well as the bracelet on her left arm with the artist's signature, are details that reinforce the idea that this woman is not just a model, but someone significant in Raphael's life. The dark background contrasts with the luminosity of her skin, giving her an air of mystery and depth that has fascinated critics and viewers throughout the centuries. This work, loaded with symbolism and possible personal history, represents a different facet of Raphael, beyond his large religious and monumental commissions. The Fornarina has been the subject of countless interpretations, from considering it a portrait of love to seeing it as an idealized representation of feminine beauty at its finest. Currently, it is housed in the National Gallery of Ancient Art in Rome, where it continues to raise questions about the true identity of the model and her relationship with the painter. An intriguing detail is that recent studies have revealed modifications to the painting, such as the removal of a ring on her hand, which has further fueled speculation about the story behind this enigmatic image. Number 8. Portrait of Baldassare Castiglione, circa 1515. In the context of the 16th century, the court of Urbino represented one of the epicenters of intellectual and artistic refinement in Italy. In this setting, Rafael Sanzio immortalized Baldassare Castiglione, a distinguished humanist, diplomat, and writer whose treatise The Courtier would become an essential reference of the Renaissance. The work, executed around 1515, not only captures the elegance and intelligence of the character, but also fits into the tradition of the great psychological portraits that would redefine the genre in Western painting. The portrait, with a sober and balanced composition, stands out for its extraordinary precision in detail. The model's clothing, in dark tones and luxurious fabrics, is masterfully executed to highlight his social status without falling into excess. The neutral background, typical of the Leonardesque influence that Raphael adopted with refinement, draws attention to the character's face. Castiglione's deep gaze conveys a serenity that seems to transcend the pictorial moment, achieving a naturalism rarely seen until that moment. The soft lighting reinforces the three-dimensionality of the face, marking a turning point in the evolution of the Renaissance portrait. This work had a lasting impact on art history, influencing even later portrait painters such as Rembrandt and Velázquez, who found in it a model of introspection and expressive nobility. It is said that Titian admired it with devotion and that it influenced his way of portraying the Venetian aristocracy. Beyond its technical perfection, the painting transcends academicism to become a visual testimony to the intellectuality and courtly values of the Renaissance, where the image of the ideal man was not based only on appearance, but on the depth of his spirit. Number 7. The Triumph of Galatea, 1512. In the 16th century, mythological narratives were enthusiastically taken up again by Renaissance artists, who saw in them a perfect vehicle for expressing idealized beauty and classical values. Within this current, Rafael Sanzio created the Triumph of Galatea, one of his most vibrant and dynamic works, which captures with masterful energy the spirit of Greco-Latin antiquity. Painted in 1512 for the Villa Farnesina in Rome, this mural work depicts the triumph of the sea nymph Galatea as she escapes from the Cyclops Polyphemus, with a visual exuberance that synthesizes the grace, movement, and harmony characteristic of Renaissance painting. The composition is a marvel of dynamism and balance. Galatea is at the center, on a shell pulled by dolphins, surrounded by a whirlwind of mythological figures in full motion. Her forms are stylized, perfectly proportioned and impeccably modeled, reflecting the influence of classical sculpture. Unlike other more narrative representations, Raphael avoids a detailed context and opts for a purely symbolic scene, the glorification of beauty and love. Galatea's pearly skin contrasts with the deep blue sky and the warm tones of the body surrounding her, achieving an exceptional chromatic vibration. This work not only represents one of the pinnacles of Renaissance fresco painting, but also reveals Raphael's ability to fuse mythology with an idealized conception of the human body. Admired by generations of artists, its influence extends into the 18th century, when neoclassicism fervently resumed its aesthetic perfection. It is said that Raphael never saw the need to paint Galatea's face from a real model, since, in his own words, her beauty was a product of the imagination, which adds an even more fascinating nuance to this masterpiece. Number 6. The Madonna Alba, circa 1510. At the beginning of the 16th century, the theme of the Madonna and Child underwent a remarkable evolution in the hands of Renaissance masters, who sought to endow these compositions with greater naturalness and expressiveness. Rafael Sanzio, in his quest for harmonic perfection, created La Madonna Alba around 1510, one of his most delicate and refined interpretations of sacred motherhood. The work, which receives its name from its belonging to the ducal family of Alba, represents the Virgin tenderly holding the infant Jesus while the infant Saint John the Baptist accompanies them in a serene landscape. The circular composition, characteristic of Raphael at this stage, gives the scene a sense of unity and visual fluidity. The arrangement of the figures creates a gentle diagonal that suggests a deep emotional bond between the characters. The modeling of the Virgin's face, of unparalleled sweetness, shows the influence of Leonardo da Vinci in the treatment of light and volume. The folds of her clothing fall naturally, enveloping the scene in an ethereal atmosphere. The color palette, dominated by soft and balanced tones, reinforces the feeling of peace that emanates from the image. This painting marks a crucial point in Raphael's career, consolidating his distinctive style in the depiction of the Virgin and establishing a canon that would be replicated and admired in the centuries that followed. Its influence on sacred art remained unchanged, serving as a reference even for the academic school of the 19th century. It is said that the symmetry and perfection in the design of this work were compared to a musical composition, reinforcing the idea that Raphael did not just paint images, but composed true visual symphonies. Number 5. The Madonna of the Goldfinch, circa 1505 and 1506. In the context of the Italian Renaissance, Rafael Sanzio emerged as a master of balance, harmony, and formal perfection. His work, The Madonna of the Goldfinch, is a testament to his technical mastery and refined artistic sensibility. Painted in the early 16th century, this composition depicts the Virgin Mary with the Christ child and Saint John the Baptist in a serene landscape bathed in a golden light that accentuates the softness of the contours. In this scene, the goldfinch held by Saint John prefigures the Passion of Christ, as the bird was associated with sacrifice and resurrection. Raphael achieves a natural and fluid interaction between the figures, displaying his mastery in the representation of idealized humanity and the delicate expression of the faces. The painting reflects the influence of Leonardo da Vinci in the pyramidal construction of the composition and the use of sfumato to soften contours, but Raphael introduces a distinctive sense of grace and sweetness. The precision in details, such as the folds of the clothing or the texture of the vegetation, demonstrates his meticulous attention to realism without sacrificing the idealization of forms. The color palette, dominated by warm and soft tones, accentuates the serenity of the scene, making each figure blend naturally into the landscape. The luminosity and aerial perspective used by the artist achieve an atmospheric depth that enriches the sense of three-dimensionality. The work is an early example of Raphael's virtuosity and one of the most obvious proofs of his ability to synthesize influences and develop a style of his own. It was created at a time when the painter was absorbing the teachings of Florence and consolidating his artistic identity. Restored in the 21st century after suffering significant damage, it is now on display at the Uffizi Gallery, where it continues to captivate those who contemplate it. Curiously, its restoration allowed the discovery of hidden layers of paint that revealed original details lost over time, proving that even masterpieces still hold secrets. Number 4. The Marriage of the Virgin, 1504. Within the artistic panorama of the 16th century, the painting The Marriage of the Virgin marks a crucial point in the career of Rafael Sanzio. Created when the artist was barely 21 years old, this work already demonstrated his extraordinary ability for composition, the use of perspective and the representation of the human figure with naturalness and harmony. Inspired by a previous work by Perugino, his teacher, Raphael introduced innovations that went beyond the rigidity of the original model and gave the scene greater dynamism and depth. The work illustrates the moment when Joseph places the ring on the finger of the Virgin Mary, surrounded by a series of characters that reinforce the solemnity of the moment. One of the most striking aspects is the use of perspective, with a central architectural structure that opens up in the background and generates an impeccable effect of depth. The precision in the arrangement of the figures and the use of vanishing lines make the viewer's eye move naturally towards the circular temple, which functions as the visual and symbolic axis of the composition. The chromatic balance and the delicacy in the representation of the faces reflect the refinement of the young Raphael, who had already mastered the principles of symmetry and proportion. This work, which marked the culmination of his apprenticeship in Umbria and his transition to the style that would make him one of the most influential figures of the Renaissance, is notable for its freshness and narrative precision. Today, it is housed in the Pinacoteca di Brera in Milan, where it remains a benchmark of Renaissance classicism. In an interesting twist, technical analysis has revealed that Raphael adjusted several details during execution, suggesting that he was honing his vision in the process, a characteristic of great painting geniuses. Number 3. The Transfiguration, from the year 1516 to the year 1520. During the last years of his life, Rafael Sanzio worked on the Transfiguration, considered his artistic testament and one of the most ambitious works of the Renaissance. Commissioned by Cardinal Giulio de' Medici for the Narbonne Cathedral, this painting represents the culmination of Raphael's genius in the synthesis of drama, lighting, and movement. Its structure is divided into two planes: the upper part, where the transfigured Christ floats in a heavenly glow accompanied by Moses and Elijah, and the lower part, where the apostles and a crowd attempt to cure a possessed child. This contrast between divine light and human struggle symbolizes the duality between the earthly and the heavenly. The bold composition breaks with the balanced serenity of his earlier works, introducing an emotional intensity that is heightened by the use of dynamic diagonals and contrasting lighting. The expressive at his funeral, reinforcing its iconic status. Today, it is housed in the Vatican museums and is considered one of the most influential works in the history of art. Over time, studies have been carried out on the work that reveal corrections in the arrangement of the figures and adjustments in the lighting, evidencing Raphael's perfectionism until his final days. In an irony of fate, this painting not only marked the end of his life, but also became the ultimate proof of his unparalleled talent. Number 2. The Sistine Madonna, 1512. Painted in the 16th century for the Church of San Sixto in Piacenza, the Sistine Madonna represents one of the most sublime moments of Marian iconography in the history of art. Raphael achieves a perfect balance between solemnity and sweetness, presenting the Virgin Mary as a heavenly yet accessible figure, enveloped in an atmosphere of mysticism and serenity. The composition is singular for its bold spatial arrangement, in which the Madonna and Child emerge from an ethereal background of clouds, surrounded by the solemn presence of Pope Sixtus II and Saint Barbara. At the foot of the scene, the two contemplative cherubs have become one of the most reproduced motifs in Western art. And dynamic style. Over the centuries, this painting has transcended its religious context to become a cultural and artistic icon. After its transfer to Dresden in the 18th century, it became one of Raphael's most influential works, admired for its formal perfection and ability to convey spirituality without resorting to excessive artifice. Even the little cherubs have acquired a reputation of their own, being reproduced on a multitude of media, from postcards to sculptures, demonstrating the work's lasting impact on the public sensibility. Number 1. The School of Athens, from 1509 to 1511. Located in the Stanza della Segnatura of the Apostolic Palace in the Vatican, the School of Athens represents one of the crowning works of the Italian Renaissance and a testament to Raphael's technical and conceptual mastery. Commissioned by Pope Julius II in the context of the Vatican's artistic reform, this mural painting symbolizes the synthesis of classical thought and humanism that characterized the 16th century, highlighting the greatest figures of Greek philosophy in a majestic architectural space. The arrangement of the characters and the depth achieved in the central perspective make the work a perfect example of Renaissance mastery in the representation of space and form. The compositional structure of the work is based on symmetry and balance, with a linear perspective that converges at the central point, where Plato and Aristotle, the two most influential figures of ancient philosophy, meet. Raphael, influenced by the teachings of Bramante and Leonardo da Vinci, creates an architecture inspired by the Pantheon in Rome, in which arches and vaults frame the scene with classical monumentality. The diversity of gestures, postures, and expressions of the philosophers, mathematicians, and astronomers reflects the richness of human knowledge and the ability of painting to represent abstract ideas with visual clarity. This work not only established Raphael as one of the greatest artists of his time, but also left a legacy that influenced generations of later painters. In a gesture of bold creativity, the artist included his own self-portrait in the scene, establishing a link between the past and the present, and paying homage to the perpetuity of knowledge. His ability to integrate classical references with technical innovations of the Renaissance has made this painting studied and admired to this day, transcending its decorative function to become a symbol of the humanist ideal. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Give it a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with your friends and family.